Howes, author and journalist. You first came to Australia in the 1970s, but let's go back a bit. Tell me a bit about your childhood growing up in England.
I was born in Letchworth Garden City. Letchworth Garden City was an experiment, a sort of utopian experiment to create a village within a city which would be surrounded by a green belt. So in other words, it would be this little enclave of happy living within a sustainable environment. So it was pretty ahead of its time, and it started at the beginning of the 20th century. I was born in 1947. It was in many ways an idyllic childhood, and in many ways a horrible childhood.
Why was it so horrible?
I didn't like children. Sorry.
Why was it so idyllic?
It was idyllic because I could get away from children in this beautiful garden city with trees and places to walk and wander. I mean, there was no stranger danger in those days. I could go wherever I wanted as long as I was home for tea.
Well, of course, you moved to London. What did you do in London?
In London, I had a schizophrenic existence in London. I was a librarian by day and a showbiz journalist by night. Sometimes I was a show business journalist by day as well, but I didn't tell my employers at the library. No, I was a librarian, and I also became a journalist, interviewing film stars, TV stars, rock stars. Very exciting life, actually.
Who was the most famous you probably interviewed?
Well, Elton John, obviously, Rod Stewart, who do we have? Helen Mirren, people like that, you know.
Who was your best interview?
Best interview in the whole of my career, I think, would be Yehudi Menuhin.
Worst?
Worst, Shirley MacLaine.
Okay, so you're in London, you're living the high life, you end up in Australia. How did you get here?
I met a man.
So you met a man. What led you coming to Australia?
The man happened to be Australian. He was about to come back to Australia because he couldn't stand the grey days, the endless grey days, and he also was finally working in a national health system, pre-Margaret Thatcher, very, very difficult. But he met me and decided he wouldn't go back to Australia and that he would stay in London, which was, of course, fine by me. But a few years later, he, for various family reasons, wanted to go back to Australia, and he asked me if I would come with him.
Were you willing?
I was very willing, but I wasn't really able because I didn't have enough points. I hadn't been to university, so I didn't get the points for my education. I didn't have a very important job for Australia. I was actually running a promotion of the British film industry at that time called British Film Year, and although prestigious, it wasn't obviously something that Australia wanted because it was British. So we heard about something, a rumour, about something called gay immigration. And Peter, my partner, said, well look, my father's dead now, my mother doesn't have any problems with me being gay, so why don't we go to Australia and become a test case for gay immigration? So I said, well, let's do that. So we came to Australia, and I was on a tourist visa, and we investigated this magical new thing, this new opportunity called gay immigration, which was given to us as a result of a Catholic immigration minister with about 7 children.
Wow.
And he said, as long as you don't generate any adverse publicity, we will consider your cases, but only I, the immigration minister, will actually pass each case on its merits.
So what year are we talking here?
We're talking about 1986.
What were your first feelings of Australia?
I'd been to Australia before. I'd been to Australia in 1974, and I'd also been in 1984. As soon as I touched down in Sydney in 1974, I knew that I loved it. It's my favourite city in the world. I also love London, and I love Switzerland and Scotland, but Sydney has always been a magic place for me, so I had absolutely no change in feeling about that. The rest of Australia, I had seen some of it, but obviously I hadn't been to see the whole of the continent. Very few people ever do. So my feelings in terms of the place were fine. It was just the fact that, you know, I was 39 years old. I'd lived half of most of my adult life in England. I was leaving my mother, who was nearly 80. I was leaving my sister, I was leaving all my friends, and I was leaving, well, I wouldn't call it a career. I think I've careered from career to career, but I was leaving my my roots, the place that I was raised and educated in.
So was that the biggest problem coming here, was leaving those you loved behind?
Not really. I think the biggest problem was, would I be allowed to stay? Because I had no guarantee that my relationship with Peter, which was about 6 years old by that time, 6 or 7 years old, would be validated by the Australian government. It certainly wouldn't have been validated by the English government. There was absolutely no provision for gay men who were in relationships with overseas partners in England to apply. So this concept of gay immigration was very, very new and dynamic. Very few countries had it.
You won your test case, didn't you?
It wasn't a test case in the end because a lot of people were applying, so we were among a number of couples. We had very good evidence. We had 18 witnesses who said that we were a genuine couple, and we filled in all the right documentation. And indeed the immigration department said that the gay applications were the best by far because they were so perfect. The reason they were so perfect is we were so scared of failing. Because if we'd failed, we had to go back home, and there'd be no chance ever to come back again.
Were there any adverse reactions?
Well, the most adverse reaction, of course, came from a Nazi group, which was a few years later, and I was the target of their extreme homophobia.
Are we allowed to ask anything that happened?
You can ask. It was an 18-month period of trial and tribulation for me. They basically targeted me. They said that I brought AIDS into Australia. They said that all gay immigrants should be strung from lampposts, basically. And in the end, they said that they saw me in the Mardi Gras parade, because in those days the Immigration Task Force, which was promoting gay immigration, used to have a float in the Mardi Gras, and we had a float one year which I was involved in, and the Nazis said if they saw me on the float, they'd shoot me. So I had to be put in isolation to watch the parade that year. It wouldn't have been very fair on the people surrounding me, would it?
Did the threats die off, though?
Well, they died off. The actual Nazis killed each other.
Oh, charming. That sounds pretty good fun. So moving on slightly, you're living in Australia.
Yes.
How do you feel you were accepted in general by Australians? Did you fit in?
I, of course, am lucky in that I speak English and understand English, and that I've got quite a good articulation, and I've been used to, of course, mixing with a lot of people. The problem I have, and I still have it, is I don't get the same emotional exhilaration from a lot of the Australian iconography, and that includes the names of the towns, the names of the cities, the names of the plants, etc. I wasn't born here. I don't have that sentimental education that people that are born in Australia have. I also find that sometimes my humour, which tends to be range from the ironic to the sarcastic, is not appreciated by some Australians. It's also very noticeable that many of my friends are expatriates, not just from England but from other countries. I have very few friends who are actually born in Australia, and that's partly because I'm mixing with people that have travelled a great deal. They're involved perhaps in the arts, media, etc. And some of them came to Australia in the same way that I was attracted to come, apart from, when I first came to Australia in the 70s, just to find out what was happening, and of course to discover this amazing, amazing continent. So
you talked about an amazing continent. What do you like best about it?
I love its extroversion. I'm a very introverted person, and I don't go to the beach, and I don't go sailing, and I certainly don't go to sports. But I love the youthfulness of the country. I love its drive and dynamism. The fact that it isn't drenched in history. It isn't calcified. It's not. overtly conservative, though it certainly has conservative elements to it. I like the freshness, I like the brashness, I like its musicals. I think we've got so much musical talent in this country. The dancing, the singing, the concerts, theatre. It's tremendous.
What do you like least?
What do I like least? The humidity. I find that very difficult, to be sweating all the time and to need to have 3 or 4 showers a day. But it's not too bad in Sydney because we get the southerly wind in the afternoon. We're very lucky in that respect. I suppose I would say the parochialism, to some extent. There is parochialism. I miss the villages and the small towns that we have in England, the pubs, the village greens, all that sort of stuff. I would love the bush to be more valued. I would love less building to go onto our beautiful bushland, because I've been a bush regenerator for about 16 years, and I really love the Australian bush. I love the plants and the animals. The insects are a bit challenging. Some of the insects, those funnel web spiders, you have to be careful.
Can you tell us what a bush regenerator does?
A bush regenerator is somebody that basically scientifically weeds. They go through and look for the native plants, and they weed around the native plants so that more natives grow. So instead of you going for the bad bush, in other words all the weeds, you go for the good bush and you weed around the good bush, and slowly, with constantly going back and weeding, you create a self-sustaining bushland, which has been unfortunately invaded by, cars and rainwater with all sorts of weeds in it, foxes, cats, dogs. The bush has really taken some battering.
So you've been a bush regenerator for many years. What else have you done since you've been here?
I was a paralegal. I worked in immigration. I worked for a legal community centre for some time. I also, of course, was an advisor for 7 years for the Gay and Lesbian Immigration Task Force, which was a wonderful job. I wrote a television column for the Sydney Star Observer. I think that was about 2 or 3 years. I've been on radio here. I wrote a book called Broadcasting It, which was a 1,000-page, 3,000-entry encyclopedia on television, radio and film. I don't think I could have done that if I'd still been in England, because there just would have been too much going on in England. The great thing about Australian television is there's less to look at, so I had more time to actually write my encyclopedia, which was nominated for a British Film Institute award. And I introduce movies. I'm involved in about 2 or 3 movie societies, which I very much enjoy. And of course I have lots of friends, and I am currently the co-writer of a book called My Name is Elizabeth, which is about the name Elizabeth.
Do you often wonder how your career would have taken off or continued in the UK if you hadn't moved here?
I do wonder, but of course my heart brought me to Australia, and my lovely Peter was worth 1,000 careers. So that I was never a career person anyway. I was able to do so many things here. I was able to act and sing, do stand-up comedy, which I love doing. So I had many opportunities here, and the great thing about living in another country is you get a better idea of your own country. You see your country's history in a much more objective light. You have to fight, you have to start from the bottom. When I came here, I was a non-entity. In England, I'd been the co-director of British Film Year, I'd worked for the United Nations International Year of Disabled People. I'd had lots and lots of jobs, and I had a moderate career profile as a writer. When I came to Australia, I had to start all over again, and it's a great thing to do.
So, for anybody that's thinking of moving here, have you any advice?
Well, certainly don't just move here. Come and have a look. Don't be seduced by the glamour and the frou-frou of the cities, because they're on the coast. I think you do need to go into some of the other areas to see, in case you might not get a job in Sydney or Melbourne or Adelaide or any of those countries, go to some of the small country towns, and of course, go to the pubs and listen to the jokes, and just sort of sink yourself into Aussie culture and see which bits you like and which bits you don't like. But if you like the sea, if you like boats, if you like beautiful beaches, this is the place for you. There are many, many, many places to wander. You don't have to be an extrovert in Australia, because otherwise I wouldn't have survived, because I'm an introvert. I like long, long, thoughtful walks along beaches and in bushland. I mean, the bushwalks here are wonderful. And there are so many interesting people. It's a large country with now a growing population, so there's more diversity of ideas and opinions. And of course, it has been said that a happy Australian is an Australian with an airline ticket in their pocket. So to some extent, you're going to meet a very well-travelled group of people, because Australia, I nearly said Ice-Australia, Australia, because Australia is isolated. It's a long way away from other countries. So you will have to consider that. You will have to realise that you won't be able to hop across to France or Sweden or Spain or anything like that. Once you're here, you're here. Yes, you might be able to travel a bit, but it's very costly.
One more question. Would you ever move back to England?
This is a big question, isn't it? Because I'm now 65 years old, I'm retired, I have a choice in life whether to go back or to stay here. I think I would just continue as I am. I feel so at home in England and so at home in Australia. And as long as I've got my strength and my physicality, I think I will just go back and come back as long as they will let me in. I would still like to call Australia home.